Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Second Nature webinar. Our program today is Managing Organizational Change for Transformational Decarbonization Initiatives on Campuses. My name is Eric Howard, and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Second Nature. Second Nature is a international organization. Oops, sorry about that. Second Nature, we're an international organization. We're committed to accelerating climate change in and through higher education. We do this by mobilizing a diverse array of higher education institutions and work with them to act on bold climate commitments to help scale campus climate initiatives and create innovative climate solutions. Today, we're going to be talking mostly about that third part, the innovative climate solutions. I'm pleased that we have about 32 states and 6 provinces represented on this program among the registrants, about 125 campuses. I was looking at the list this morning. 75 people have sustainability in their title. We also have a couple of professors and members of the faculty. Most likely they're playing a role in a campus sustainability committee. Where did all these people come from? They're all over the place. And they heard about us from some of our own marketing and outreach to members of the Second Nature community. But I also want to recognize ASHE. The ASHE mailing list was beneficial in helping people know that the program was happening, as well as NYSERDA. And then Fred Stanton and Bob Mancini played also a big role. They work at Ecosystem, which is one of our partners for today's program. I have a little bit of a logistics to talk through, but while I mention the logistics, we're going to put up a first quick poll and give you a chance to read the poll and answer a couple of questions. You heard at the very beginning that today's program is being recorded. And the session will be publicly available on Second Nature's website probably early next week. The second thing is you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of the participants using the sort of the chat box. If you send your questions to me, to Eric Howard, I'll curate those questions and pass them on when we're at the Q&A section. And lastly, because it's a webinar, pretty much everybody is on mute, but we do appreciate you participating in whatever way works best for you. I'll click now to end the poll and share the results. So you can see that when you think about where our various folks with respect to their campus decarbonization initiatives, about a quarter are currently implementing, 40% are actively planning, and that's probably why so many of you are here, because you're in the planning stages. A quarter are considering, and hopefully those who are stalled or delayed will come up with some great ideas to help you move forward. For today's session, we have 3 speakers who I believe you can see on your screen. We have Micah from Vassar College, Marc from the University of Toronto, and Adam from Ecosystem Energy. And before I pass the microphone and control over to our panelists, I do want to give a quick thanks to the universities, the nonprofit and corporate partners that we work with, including the sponsor and partner for today's webinar, Ecosystem. They're involved in our Solution Center, and that's why they're also involved in today's webinar. So I will disappear and let the 3 panelists and speakers move on. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Great, thanks, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone, except for those on the West Coast. My name is Adam Shelley. I'm a Senior Project Development Engineer at Ecosystem Energy. Before I introduce the 2 panelists, I want everyone watching to know This panel is not intended to belabor the benefits and value of a decarbonized campus. We assume that you're here because you want that too, and you want to learn about the importance of managing this cultural and process change to get there. In fact, based on the welcoming poll, many of you are actively planning campus decarbonization already, but we want all of you to do so. I have 3 goals for all panels that I moderate or attend. One is that the viewers will learn at least 3 new things or more if you're an overachiever, that we all enjoy the panelists, and that we leave feeling like it was an hour well spent. I'm confident we will get that done. Each of us can talk many hours about this issue, but unfortunately we have less than an hour to go. So without further ado, I introduce you to Marc Couture of the University of Toronto and Micah Kenfield of Vassar College. So first question, can you tell us a little bit about your campuses and the status of your campus's current decarbonization initiatives? Micah, why don't you answer that one first?
Sounds great. Well, as you'll see on the slide that is about to be up, vamping for time. There we go. Perfect. So Vassar College is a small elite private school founded in 1861, about 90 minutes north of New York City. We have about 2,500 students. 2,200 were in residence this year, with the other 300 or so either taking a semester off or participating in classes remotely as opposed to coming to campus. Our campus is pretty big for the number of students we have. We have about 1,000 acres, which includes a 400-acre natural preserve that we've put a lot of effort into continuing to host and maintain. That's a very big part of our decarbonization plan. I'll get to that in a moment. We also have over 100 buildings that have incredible historic character and incredible rich, deep history with them, including lots of historic heating and cooling systems that some are original to their buildings from the early 1900s. So a lot of challenges with the decarbonization process, as I'm sure you can imagine. And just, I would be remiss in not acknowledging exactly how incredibly fortunate we've been as a New York institution to be able to partner with NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, on a number of projects. If you're in New York and you're not familiar with them, you need to look it up. I promise NYSERDA did not sponsor us on that. They've just been incredible partners. And so as you'll see on the next slide, for our specific decarbonization plans, in the short term, we're looking by about 2022 to do some basic electrification of some of our heating systems where we can. We're looking at a migration from natural gas and number 2 fuel oil to a renewable fuel oil biomass product. By 2030, at the absolute latest, we're planning on reaching carbon neutrality. That's going to be through a series of deep decarbonization initiatives combined with probably some level of offsets for any remaining scope 1 and 2 emissions. But I mentioned that we have an ecological preserve and that was important to our process. And where that really comes in is our long-term ambition to be climate positive or carbon negative, where we think we have a really clear and strong path for us to eventually end up getting our scope 1 and 2 emissions below the amount of carbon that we're able to just naturally sequester from our preserve and some of our other carbon sequestration projects. So we've really set that as where we see ourselves going. We haven't set a firm date of 2030 for neutral and then this next date, but instead we're using it as the guiding principle to get us to where we need to be. And I'll pass it over to Marc.
Thank you, Micah. So I'll just give you some high-level stats about the University of Toronto St. George campus. We at this campus are roughly 70,000 students. At the tri-campus level, we're a little over 90,000 students. Our footprint is comprised of roughly 180 acres in downtown Toronto. And that consists of a little over 15 million square feet spread over 140 buildings. And a particular challenge to us and to our department when we're looking at decarbonization is our rapid growth that's forecasted for the next 30 years. By 2030, we're looking at about 60% campus growth. And by 2050, we're looking at a little over 90% growth, so almost doubling that square footage from 15 million up to about 28 or 29. As well, we have a lot of our existing buildings that are quite old. our campus was founded in 1827, and we still have some 1800s vintage buildings on our campus in our historic core. So this does pose quite a challenge. And on the next slide here, we'll look at some of the initiatives that we're doing to decarbonize. We've launched our low carbon action plan in 2019. This is a 5-year plan with a target of reducing our emissions by 44,000 metric tons. And this is net of growth. This also includes the development of Canada's largest urban geo-exchange system with over 370 boreholes that are being dug to depths of about 850 feet. And drilling is ongoing as we speak in King's College Circle in our historic core. And we also launched in July of 2020 a new energy performance standard aimed to set very aggressive targets for energy use intensity, as well as GHG intensity for all new construction, as well as major and minor retrofits on campus. We have a target here to try and reduce our absolute emissions by 37% by 2030. And this is referencing a 1990 baseline. I think that the 1990 baseline for us is important because our emissions on campus actually grew by about 50,000 metric tons between 1990 and 2010. So for us to try and reduce below that 1990 target actually adds a significant amount of carbon reduction for us. And ultimately by 2050, we're looking to go to carbon neutrality and beyond. So as you'll see on the next slide here, we're sort of forecasting the impact of several different initiatives that we're trying to implement over the near, medium, and longer term. But you'll see the top, our design standards that we've just implemented are set to really mitigate the impact of a lot of the growth that's going to happen in our campus. One other piece that we're looking at here is we're looking at 80% absolute reductions, and we're not going to use any third-party offsets to achieve our goal. The last piece, that last sub 20% piece, is going to be U of T owned renewables that will serve to offset that remaining sub 20%.
Great, thanks, Marc. For those of you watching, we do have some prepared questions, but it's going to very quickly go into a Q&A because I want to try to get to as many questions from everyone as possible because everyone has unique campus situations. So I encourage you to use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll also be going into a choose your own adventure question later on. So now that you guys have the context of the panelists and their campus and their initiatives, my first question is for Micah. How did the decarbonization movement or initiative start in your campus, and who do you consider to be the early advocates of that?
Sure. So at Vassar, we've had a strong relationship with environment and this, with the environment and sustainability, going back basically to our founding. Without getting too in the details that aren't appropriate for lunchtime, Vassar had one of the most groundbreaking, environmentally responsible septic systems of all time in the 1890s. We were pioneers in that field and have continued to innovate in far more exciting and appropriate for public webinar ways as far as on-campus farm for the majority of our existence for food. We've had some, energy efforts on an ongoing basis, but where we really started to see a kind of critical mass leading to where we are was in the early 2010s or so. There'd been an increasing push, everywhere, but at Vassar specifically, of this commitment to carbon neutrality, as well as some other things, how we manage our endowment and implement sustainability in other chapters in campus. That led to a 2016 commitment that was pushed through a combination of faculty, staff, students, everyone kind of grassroots, to get a commitment to carbon neutrality no later than 2030. It also then led to, among other things, a conversation at our board level of whether or not to implement negative screens as part of our investment policy towards divestment. When the decision was made, let me adopt the passive voice for a second. When the decision was made not to adopt negative screens as part of a socially conscious investing policy, The decision was then also made to make a really deliberate and intentional investment in our own campus infrastructure. And so it ended up being one of those trade-offs that's led to some very rapid, very, very positive changes on campus to, again, we've had this commitment to sustainability for a long time, but that I think kind of helped push us over that hill of, and now we're going to actively invest over $10 million into a project over the next 3 years and far more to come in getting us to carbon neutrality.
Marc, I think I have the same question for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Micah. Very interesting what Vassar is doing. At University of Toronto, I think that we have as well a rich history focused on the environment and sustainability. I know that going back to even like the very early 70s, we had a lot of student groups and a lot of environmental activism that was really grassroots from the students. And even back again in the early 70s, I think that U of T hired their first energy manager in 1973. And that position became full-time as of 1977. The sustainability office that I am in was founded in 2004 and had membership with the students as well as with the academics. I think that we were also early adopters towards like a green revolving fund to support sustainability and energy conservation initiatives. Our green fund was founded in 1990 with sort of seed funds of 250,000, which doesn't sound like much today, but in $1990, I'm sure it was huge. It's grown now to about $10 million and will continue to grow. We also implemented an environmental policy in 1994. And then, since then into the 2000s, we've made commitments towards carbon neutrality and others. So it's just sort of led us down that path.
Marc, do you see yourself at University of Toronto sort of as the project champion there? And is it just you moving this forward now, or are there other people involved? And how do you guys work together?
So we sort of have a larger framework for sustainability at the University of Toronto. So I would see myself not necessarily as the champion, but more of an agent of change to try and promote and facilitate and enable broader change across our campus and our campuses. With a large campus the size of ours, I think for us to try and actually be the champion for all the different initiatives will really turn us into a bottleneck pretty fast. So the more that we can enable and facilitate and just support, like I mentioned, we have, I think today we have over 60 student groups focused around the sustainable development goals or sustainability, whether it's about building efficiency or HVAC systems or building envelope or circular campus or growing food on campus. I mean, if you can name it, I think we have it in terms of the student group. So our role is really more to enable all those individual champions to affect change on a broader scale.
Great. Micah, a slightly different question for you, I think. You seem to have brought a lot of people on the journey to get to this point. How did you sort of align everyone's interests and build institutional support to get the funding, to get the administrative support to do what you're doing there?
So I mean, any sort of decarbonization, well, any project period on a college campus of any sort of meaningful size or consequence is going to need buy-in from a lot of different groups. For something like our decarbonization plan alone, not even touching other aspects of our climate action plan, we have a huge number of groups from facilities operations and the different areas within that, obviously, to strategic planning, budgeting, student affairs, or the Dean of College Life at Vassar. All of these different groups come together to bring both ideas to the table. They also have concerns. Anytime you talk about sustainability, a lot of times there's that question of, are you going to switch us over to low flow shower heads in all the residence halls, or are there going to be negative trade-offs? And I think any responsible sustainability professional will say at some point, our sustainability goals will involve some level of trade-off, not an insurmountable one, but to reach deep decarbonization, there will have to be some changes to the status quo that are maybe, if not uncomfortable, then at least new and takes some getting used to. So for me, what I've found has been really successful is just getting people at the table, sitting down with them, hearing where they are. During my first 3 weeks at Vassar, I had 38 meetings. I went back and checked my calendar with all these different departments and areas and individuals who touch sustainability in some way, just to get a sense of the baseline for where they are. Not necessarily to say like, I'm going to be able to do everything on your wish list, not necessarily to say like there won't be any painful changes, but at least to understand where they're coming from. And I think that's the biggest thing when you're bringing these groups to the table. I mean, people are afraid of somebody coming in and not understanding what they're doing and trying to tell them how to do their job. When you approach it instead by saying, I know how, you know how to do your job better than I could. Here's what I'm hoping we could do together. It changes the angle of the conversation so much. And I think it makes it a lot easier to build that kind of buy-in.
What was the timeline in building that kind of buy-in? Like, I assume with some stakeholders, it took longer than others. Without getting specific, maybe give us a range.
You know, I think it's an ongoing conversation. But I think that it's really something where, you know, some people jumped in and they were like, we've got someone in the role again. There'd been about 10 months of vacancy before I came in. And so for some, it was like all this pent up energy ready to go. Others, it took a little bit of time. So because you're asking me not to get specific, I won't say, you know, it was only took me 2 weeks and a happy hour with a couple of the facilities guys in the energy department or whatever. But, you know, like it's an ongoing conversation. I think as long as you indicate that you're willing to listen and you're willing to open those doors and there's that kind of dialogue with administration, it happens eventually.
And you guys are welcome to get as specific as you want. I just don't want to put you guys on the spot. I know a lot of people are watching and didn't want to put you in an uncomfortable position. So my next question is for Marc, and Mike, I'm going to ask the same thing to you. You guys seem to have pretty large toolkits and different strategies that you use to get that buy-in. Are there any specific things that people should know, whether they're policies or processes, that you thought were most helpful?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I would say that for us, and I think generally speaking for higher education, we're in a situation where we're fortunate to have a lot of top-down support in the form of commitments and pledges. I know that our counterparts in a lot of other institutions, such as healthcare, you know, they're really working from a grassroots or bottom-up kind of approach where they don't have that necessarily the same commitment from their upper management to pledge towards carbon neutrality or something beyond that. So for us, you know, our president's commitment is a huge part. We've also, as a result of that president's commitment, we also have a presidential advisor on climate change and sustainability, and he is the co-chair of a committee on environment, climate change, and sustainability. And that framework sort of serves as almost like a steering committee for the tri-campus level to align efforts and to affect change on an institutional scale. So, you know, we're really focused on, through that committee, regenerative sustainability and the integration of both operational and academic sustainability, which is a big deal because those two pieces don't often work side by side. So we're really trying to follow a few different key principles within that framework of implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, trying to implement things and work with the campus as a living lab, and try and really enable agents of change. In terms, so that structure in and of itself, I think really rallies and aligns a lot of the efforts around those key principles. And it's a huge enabler, I think, for us. Another piece specific to my department, which is more operationally focused, our sustainability office is nestled under facilities and services. So it's more operationally driven. And for us, the performance standard that we released in July last year is a huge enabler. So this is a standard that really is meant to run in parallel with the Toronto Green Standard for the City of Toronto, and to push the envelope just a little bit further. And it's an EUI based standard, so energy use intensity, providing very aggressive targets for any new construction, as well as major renovations and minor renovations, so that they achieve a minimum EUI target, as well as a greenhouse gas intensity target. And you know, what we've done is we've devised a project charter which at the kickoff of every project, we set a target for each project, each renovation, each project, and that charter has to get signed off through my office at 5 different points throughout that project lifecycle to ensure that it's on track to meet our sustainability goals. And for us, this is a huge lever because it effectively aligns all of the capital dollars spent as well as the deferred maintenance dollars spent in support of our desire to be beyond carbon neutral by 2050. So hopefully over the next 30 years, I would hope that what will represent about 60% of our building stock come 2050, that almost all of those buildings will have had some level of renovation, which will have to bring them up to our internal code, if you will, and that any of that new growth, which will represent just under 50% of our campus in 2050, those impacts will have been mitigated substantially by this new performance standard.
That's great, Marc. I mean, we do that at Ecosystem too, where we advocate for using existing budgets that are going to go out to capital projects and just making sure they're aligning with your sustainability goals. So in addition to the sustainability projects that you're doing on their own, you're doing other projects that are contributing to sustainability.
Absolutely. So this is just leveraging the existing budgets that are out there, but we also have our revolving fund, as well as other projects that are solely driven more on IRR or payback that are looking to accelerate that plan as well. One thing I was going to mention in terms of change management with these types of policies is that there's change management both internally as well as externally. So your internal stakeholders could be your project management department, your building occupants, your planners, your operators, of course, as well. And it's important to have a lot of education and support for those teams as they look to transition towards a new standard. But also externally, all the consultants that we work with that design these new buildings and design the renovations, it's also really key to have them on board and to try and minimize the amount of change that they're experiencing. So I think one of the ways that the university did this quite well is by mirroring an existing standard that was developed by the City of Toronto. So it wasn't completely a fresh or clean sheet approach where it was 100% bespoke. We took an existing standard that the local consultants were very familiar with, and we sort of modified it to fit our specific needs and our specific targets. But I think that's one way of really trying to minimize the amount of change management.
Good point, Marc. Micah, what about your toolkit? What does it look like? What are your favorite tools to use?
Well, as a professional bureaucrat, structures, but we have a really strong governance structure in place at Vassar to support sustainability, both a top-down climate action and sustainability committee, which includes senior officers, including the president, as well as students, both from the student government and from some of the environmental clubs, representatives selected from the faculty at large, the relevant administrators that actually get things done. And that group, just having those people in a room once a month to hear about things at all levels, from big, deep decarbonization efforts, all the way down to the type of signage we're standardizing for our campus waste bins. Like bringing that together, I think really helps get that kind of across the board buy-in. One of the other tools that we've used through our climate action planning or plan development process, and we keep using in other applications on campus, is this idea of making sure you get feedback from as many people as possible in somewhat of a formal way. So during the drafting of our climate action plan, we had a core group that was doing some of the writing, but we also had 4 separate topical climate action teams, or CATs, that were responsible for looking at different topics like land and carbon sequestration, or energy and building use and things like that, and coming up with those ideas as well. So we ended up having over 150 different people weighing in on the things they cared about most when it came to sustainability. And at a college of only about 3,300 people total, counting faculty, staff, students, administrators, the people that walk their dog through campus because it's scenic, like everybody as far as stakeholders go, was a really meaningful input. I mean, I keep saying, like, get people at the table, talk to them and listen to them, but that honestly can do more than any fancy tree diagram from one of my org theory textbooks, I promise.
So you guys have done a wonderful job of painting your campuses as being supportive and amazing of sustainability in every capacity. Where were your sources of resistance, and how did you address them, or are you still addressing them?
I guess I'll take that one first, Marc. Don't worry. Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things to me at Vassar, kind of the metaphor I used when I first, well, not when I first got there, when I had about 3 months to realize what I jumped into, was, like I've been in institutions where it feels like you're in a rowboat and you're the one doing all of the rowing as the sustainability person. At Vassar, I'm in charge of the rudder for the sailboat. The boat is moving very quickly. I'm here to help nudge it. And I would much rather be the rudder than the oarsman, to remember back to sailing class 2 decades ago. But that's a really weird way of starting this out. But it's really just to say that there's a huge amount of energy and enthusiasm. So for me, where the challenges came from at Vassar weren't so much saying should we spend this money, or how do you sell it to the administration? Those are big factors and you have to be able to show your work, but that didn't end up being the hitch. It was more with some of the more, I've had days since the run through to try to think of the nice way to put this, and I still don't know the best way to kind of articulate this idea, but people who are very proactive champions for sustainability, there we go, who maybe even a commitment of 2030 for carbon neutrality didn't seem to be soon enough. And that's where I think we were able to be supported both by, we commissioned a study to see what it would take to get to net zero through our partnership with Ecosystem, which helped us show, unless we shut campus down completely, the absolute soonest we could fully electrify all our buildings would be 2035, just because of phasing and, how long it takes to do mechanical upgrades. That became a huge part of it, of being able to show up with data and say, let's find the way that we can make the most meaningful impact as quickly as possible, but then keep that going. And the other piece was, again, being backed up by those numbers and having heard what people were worried about. A lot of people who had concerns even about some of our decarbonization plans, or us looking at things like biomass as an interim type of heating, were concerned because they were worried that we would just switch over to renewable fuel oil and then never ever switch to anything else again. And so in our latest climate action plan, we include dual targets of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but also reducing our total heating combustion on campus through a number of different ways, of such saying, regardless of when you look at the life cycle analysis, what you chalk this up to or how you treat this, we're going to be burning a lot less of it in 10 years than we were, or in 5 years. And finding a way to address that, I think, helped bring people on board, because the challenge wasn't so much should we do something, it was coming up with something that the people who are saying we should do it all today could live with, and the budget people could also find a way to make happen.
Right. Marc?
That's my turn. So I think if I step back and I look at how we make things relevant here to our administrators and budget protectors, and also the faculty, I think that it really boils down to tying sustainability and our actions to the core mission and the purpose of the university. So the more that we can tie things to our purpose and sort of build up our reputational endowment, if you will, the more that people will be engaged, and the more they'll want to suffer through a little bit of pain for the greater cause, right? So it sort of takes people away from looking at it as a what's in it for me type perspective, and focusing more on the larger, more enduring, sustained change that they'll be part of. And I think that for the administrators are really focused on driving long-term value. So if we can speak to them as, this is a strategic move, and you're actually driving value for them, both in terms of the quality of the education and the environment that they're providing, but also financially long-term. I think that's a big deal for every institution, including ours. In terms of sources of resistance and of support, Adam, I kind of feel like, the policies and the standards that we have in place kind of paved the way. We get lots of buy-in over the what and also the why, but where it gets a little bit trickier from what I've seen is when you start getting into the how. So that's great. We know where we're going. We're all bought into the vision, but how are we actually going to do it? And who's going to do it, right? So I think when you get to that point, you really need to speak to people's passions, and as well as their personal motivations. And it's crucial to be recognizing the human element in change, and especially in transformational change. People will react and they'll tend to integrate change in their own way, and they'll need time to adjust and adapt to these changes. The best that we can do here is to try to anticipate their needs and proactively kind of address common concerns, and to be like the guides to sort of bring them through that change. The way that I've found, best to do this is to engage with people, co-create these solutions and develop the solutions with them, knowing where you want to go. That can be done through workshops. It can be done through training sessions. And I think that, people definitely want to be heard. So, engaging them with empathy, with curiosity, and also with frequency, just to sort of flesh out any concerns or any hesitations. And, not only to meet in groups, but if you sense that there's a lot of hesitation or some concerns with particular individuals or stakeholders, meet with them one-on-one. Have sessions with them. I mean, I think in this kind of an environment, there's no such thing as engaging too frequently, to try and flesh those things out and to sort of be that enabler, right? And again, co-create wherever you can. I mean, when you have 2, 3, 4, 10 minds working on a problem, it's always better than 1 or 2.
Yeah, thank you both for answering that politically difficult question. I think it's important to really open up and show everyone on this call that it is challenging. I mean, there are 75 people, like Eric said, on this call that have the word sustainability in their title, and many of them probably don't have any budgets assigned to it. So it is a challenge. It is frustrating. You guys have had success at your campuses, but it took a lot of work. But you guys got there. So thanks for sharing some of your pains. From here on out, we're sort of going to go into a Q&A. But first, we're going to do a choose your own adventure question to see which question you guys want answered of these next 3. If we have some additional time, we can potentially get to all of them, but I see there's a ton of live questions from you on this call, which is great. We're going to answer a lot of them, I hope. Maybe we'll do a quick fire round.
Yeah.
Because there are some. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Micah.
Not to just jump in, actually, I had the pane open just because I saw several questions about it. When it comes to how Vassar's handling the offsets and ecological sequestration, we're working on a huge project this summer to create the full documentation workflow of how we're going to do everything. We'll be using one of the verified carbon standard protocols for it, and we're doing a whole guide that'll be publicly available probably in September or October is our target. So I won't answer any of those other questions necessarily today, but we will have a huge resource coming out later this year. And I know we'll definitely be plugging in like the ASHE listservs and some of the other tools when that comes out. I saw 6 questions about that in the box. So answered them all. Not to just jump in, Adam, but to just jump in.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. I think we have the results of the question. Oh, it's close. This is going to be fun. All right. So the winner was, how do you overcome the lack of funding argument? That is a great question. Marc, how do you guys overcome the lack of funding argument?
I'll defer that over to Micah.
Gosh, with the block. Yeah, I would say, one of the biggest things, I know everyone's sick of hearing this phrase, right? The business case for sustainability, but I think there's a couple of ways that you approach it. I think that the first 40% of your decarbonization initiatives, as a kind of rule of thumb that may or may not be fully accurate, but is close enough for a webinar with 250 people, the first 40% of your decarbonization stuff is going to probably pay for itself with a relatively quick payback. And so there's a lot of opportunities, whether you end up working with somebody outside as a firm or whether you have it as your in-house expertise. There are opportunities to build a pretty strong business case of our first tranche of work, if we're not doing anything, can pay for itself pretty quickly, and you can open the door, have conversations about different sources of how you finance it. But that's kind of easy sell. And then as a kid, my favorite book was If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. For those of you not familiar, the idea is the mouse wants a cookie, and then it wants water, and then it wants more. And as you do this, you keep moving. And that's the practice you should take to sustainability. I mean, as you start showing that there are things that have a business case that makes sense, you're able to kind of build, I think, momentum to get into some of the deeper stuff. not to speak too broadly, but I think that anytime you're working with a budget office, it's not that they don't support what you're doing. There's just everybody's mission is important. And so it can be hard sometimes to make a case based on like, this is the thing we need to do because decarbonization is a priority for XYZ reasons. Like you have to find a way to kind of get your foot in the door. And so I think focusing on, however you can get that ball rolling of the quick payback projects, but with the expectation of, like I'm a big fan of revolving loan funds because you're able to show like, if this is saving money, let's take a little bit of those savings and put it back into our campus before we start taking this or into our sustainability efforts before we put it elsewhere. That sort of answered your question.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I can also answer some of that. There's a lot of different financial vehicles that can really help out where the university doesn't need to put forward their own money or even issue debt. You can do different partnerships. There's a P3 partnership, a public-private partnership. You can also do energy procurement contracts where you are paying for the project directly through the energy savings. And I think Marc touched on it earlier, where it's aligning existing budgets to get the work done that you want to do, but in a better way that's more holistic to your campus's mission. So I think those are a couple ways to address that. So let's get into the questions. We have some questions were pre-asked when you guys were registering for it. One of them was, for a campus considering a decarbonization plan, what is a realistic timeline and how can you compress it?
I think it really depends on the scale of your campus. Realistic timelines for decarbonization. I mean, I think one of the first things to look at are the different first fuels available to your campus. So to look at what different energy forms you're able to use, and to also look at the costs and the cost differences, the spark spreads of these different fuels, and to have a strategy around energy procurement, which will sort of meet your sustainability goals. Depending where you are, this could be biomass, it could be RFO, it could be electricity, it could be renewable natural gas. I mean, it could be a multitude of different things, but doing that analysis first, I think will set the stage for what your high overarching strategy will be. And then from there, it's more the transformational change that has to happen at your physical campus level to convert things. Micah talked about electrification. I mean, if electricity is 5 times more expensive than natural gas, this might be a huge hurdle for you, even though the electricity might be cleaner, or you might be able to procure renewable electricity. If there's a huge cost penalty, that might really hinder your ability to accelerate that change. One of the strategies we're exploring here at U of T is definitely focused around electrification, but also around trying to procure clean renewable electricity at a lower cost. And that hopefully will serve as a catalyst and an enabler for us to accelerate our changes. So although we're looking to hit our 80% absolute scope 1 and 2 reduction by 2050, we're actually hoping to achieve a 50% reduction much sooner than that, hopefully before 2024, in line with our low carbon action plan. So we're really trying to front load some of our emission savings. And one of the instigators for that has been a very sharp escalation in carbon taxes in Canada, where our federally mandated carbon tax is going to escalate up to $170 per ton by 2030. And for us, that's kind of a game changer. We estimate it's going to double the cost of natural gas by about 2027, I think. So that's a very significant hike in our costs.
I can go into the next one. Let's do a quick rapid fire one based on some of these questions. How are you guys heating your campuses? What's the source of heating?
We have a big one is a central steam loop that does about 80% of our campus heating, currently fired by natural gas. We've got 5 boilers. One of them's cogen. We're looking at migrating our biggest boiler or biggest 2 boilers potentially over to renewable fuel oil effective next heating season, assuming we finish getting through permitting process.
Micah, any plans to electrify or go off steam?
We're starting on the short term doing partial electrification of as many buildings as we can in places where we have a hot water network, doing a step down and adding heat recovery, heat pumps and things like that. One of the buildings we're working on this summer, we're setting up to be geothermal ready. So it's set to be very efficient, have the heat pump technology in, and then down the line, we can go ahead and put in the geothermal wells to migrate it fully over. But in the meantime, still have it get some of its heat from the central loop. Super briefly, because I know this is high rapid fire. When you're working with anything like a central steam loop or central heating, getting from to 85% electrified is easier than getting that last 15% of electrification. So that's another thing to keep in mind whenever you're considering your different paths to carbon neutrality and beyond.
Marc?
And I would say, I would echo everything Micah just said, with the exception of the RFO. So it's actually amazing, Micah, how many parallels there are between Vassar and the U of T. The more we talk, the more I'm seeing these parallels. But so like you were trying to, our current distribution is 80% district steam, and that is actually partially steam, partially high temperature, high pressure hot water, partially medium temperature hot water, and also partially low temperature hot water. But it all comes from the central steam plant. That steam plant has 4 boilers, 1 cogen, as well as a HRSG attached to the cogen. So we're trying to transition that and try to implement, instead of your RFO boilers, we're trying to look at the feasibility for a couple electric boilers to take a substantial portion of that load, add some diversity, and green our heating system a little bit. So that's one piece for us. Future looking, we're looking at more of a hybrid between centralized and decentralized. We're looking at interconnected nodes. Each node would be supported by geo-exchange systems for both heating and cooling, as well as its own sort of feeder, I guess, to integrate into the microgrid. So we are sort of trying to convert our buildings towards low temperature hot water, high delta T, and make them sort of future ready for our nodal approach. The first one, as I mentioned, is being our first geo-exchange field is being drilled right now in King's College Circle, where we have over 380 boreholes being drilled.
Great, thanks. I should know you both well enough by now to know that quick fire wasn't really going to happen, but that was good. A couple of related questions. When you guys sit down, if you were going to recommend to a university who is just starting their decarbonization plans, what experts do they need around the table? Should they involve their utilities?
Short is obviously yes. Now talk to your utilities, but I think that, I mean, for me, the first thing that you really should be looking at is getting in, whether it's building engineers or your utility or some combination of looking at what's feasible in terms of both energy efficiency and electrification for your buildings in the near term, especially if you haven't committed to a date for carbon neutrality yet, because you want to make sure that you do it right and you have time to do it intentionally. In theory, we could all be carbon neutral by 2022 if we were buying 40 cent a ton methane capture offsets from Slovenia. Like, don't set a date and then necessarily without knowing what goes into it. Like, get a good baseline of what your buildings are like and what those biggest hurdles to decarbonization are going to be. Get those at the table, and that'll even make the conversations with your senior leadership a lot easier, because you're able to say, we brought this in, we looked at these buildings, we know what it's going to cost. It's not like you have to worry about the gotcha.
All right. Moving to the data side a little bit, it was another choose your own adventure question. I don't want to leave out the other half of people who wanted to hear that. What data seems to garner more resources and leads to action?
Can you elaborate maybe a bit, Adam? What data seems to garner more resources?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people on the call who have a lot of information about their energy usage, about their dollar spends. What can they pull from the resources and the information that they have about their current campus that's going to drive interest from people who are making additional decisions? I think EUI was mentioned in the chat a few times. How do you pick your future projected EUI based on the reduction? How do you identify potential savings? Are you using payback? I know an ecosystem. We use net present value a lot because it really shows the power of projects over time. But what have you guys found is most influential with certain stakeholders?
Well, similarly to Micah again, I mean, we have buildings on campus that are over 130 years old. So looking at the life cycle or taking the life cycle approach, especially for new construction or major renovation, I think is a great thing. There's been sort of an aptitude and a requirement at U of T to analyze the life cycle of projects for many, many years now. So that's a great approach. In terms of metrics, embedded within our performance standard, which is based on the Toronto Green Standard, we have metrics like building air tightness. We have, the TEDI, the thermal energy demand intensity for both heating and cooling. We're looking at GHG intensity, and we're looking at EUI. So I wouldn't say that there's necessarily one magic bullet there, because each of those different metrics supports different sort of characteristics that are very important to the university. We do want to decarbonize, and we want to do that through reducing the energy use intensity, but also choosing the right fuels, the right technologies, the right efficiencies. We look at air tightness to ensure that our envelopes are of very, very high quality. And, we look at the TEDI to make sure that, the siding and the architectural elements are top notch, but also that there's thermal resiliency within the building, that the building can sustain, a power outage or a heating outage, both in winter or in cooling, a cooling outage in the summer. So they all kind of, I think they all play a role. They all sort of fit together to drive sort of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve.
The one thing I'd add to that, besides yes to all of that, the other thing even is, there's some great data looking at where sustainability fits in as a selling point for your university. And I think it was Princeton Review just put out a note that 75% of incoming students noted that sustainability was a significant factor in their decision of where to go to college. So when you start addressing it that way, you start getting sense of like what motivates donors coming in from the alum side. Then you're also able to almost make an economic argument if it's not just about the buildings in this tiny box, the budget. It's about how do we attract the students that we want to attract, and how do we make sure that they're going to be part of the legacy of our institution.
I think you just directly answered someone's question, which is these transformational projects just cause a lot of disruption at your campus. How do you maintain the goodwill of your college or university community for the long haul? I guess your opinion is that they want that.
Yeah, and I think even for the people that are, again, it's one of those of when you sit down, you talk to lots of people, you get a sense of where they're coming from, and like, I'm really sorry you're going to have this noise above your head for 3 months in your office every single day while they're going ahead and overhauling this. Like, it's not fun, but it's working towards something better, and it's short, and we did talk to you first. It's not like you just came in and then all of a sudden you have this experience. Having lived in, if you can close out a building and just completely renovate it with nobody in occupancy, do that. But if you have to,
I think that concept is true for a lot of construction. It's all about communication, not just for the engineers and the architects and the contractors, but to the people that you're disrupting. As long as they are aware of what's going on and why it's going on, we think that like community awareness is critical to a project. It can grind a project to a halt if you are not properly communicating with the client and the community.
Yeah, they can be very powerful stakeholders, right, Adam? I mean, the community engagement piece should happen early and often. I think it's really important for people in our roles, Micah, to be identifying all those stakeholders and, sort of almost prioritizing them based on the impacts that will be that they will be living with during the project or during the initiative. And, sort of gauging how often you have to engage with them based on the level or severity of the impacts, right?
Definitely.
I see a question. When you're looking at decarbonization, is it primarily based off of energy use? What else is included in your GHG inventories? I think from a building and operational standpoint, it's not just about energy use, it's about the energy source. So if you're getting it from wind and solar, you could use a ton of energy. and you would be decarbonized. But I think operationally, that's a great, or other operations, that's a great question. Transportation and other scopes of carbon. So can you guys talk a little bit about how that plays into your decarbonization plans?
Yeah. Oh, Marc, go.
I'm gonna go. Okay. So definitely, I would say that for us, probably very similarly to Micah, having a central steam plant. Our central steam plant currently contributes about 75% to our overall GHG inventory for our St. George campus, thereabouts. It's probably not an exact number, but so that that's the first place for us to start if you want to have a big impact. The rest of it is found through reducing some of the EUI in some of the buildings and gaining efficiencies in different areas. So I think there needs to be a balance between having a very good EUI target and doing a conservation first approach, but also leveraging efficiencies and emissions factors of different fuels. So as an example, I think our campus stands somewhere around an EUI of 1.63 gigajoules per square meter. Some of you'll have to convert that to kBTU or to equivalent kilowatt hours, but so we're trying to bring that down by 2030. Our target through our performance standard and through our deep energy retrofit program is to drive that value down from 1.63 down to sub 0.7. And that's going to be, again, a net of growth. So the new growth that will be substantially below 0.7 will help drive that number down, but we still have to tackle the existing building stock, which is essentially an energy pig right now.
Yeah, and I'll just super quick because I know we're almost at time. But for Vassar, all of our building emissions, basically anything you would see on a typical scope 1 and scope 2 emission list, purchased electricity, purchased fuels, on campus generation, all that is included. For our scope 3s, we include things like transportation and kind of the usuals you would expect from those, especially as second nature member institutions. As far as how we look at our decarbonization initiatives, we put more of a focus on what can we do to get like zero between on-campus sinks and scope 1 and 2 netting out, and then scope 3 and offsets are a different conversation outside the scope of this webinar, because I see Eric's camera's back on.
I've got one more. Oh, I got one more question, and then I'll hand it over to Eric. Let's pretend I'm the new vice president of decarbonization at Old School University. What is the first step I should take to get everyone on board with a decarbonization plan?
Talk to trades, custodial, administrative assistants first. They are the people who hold all the power. They are the people who do everything, and they are the people who are most directly impacted and least listened to. If you start there and work your way up, you will have 1,000 times better time than the other way around.
Marc?
Wow, that's a great answer, Micah.
All right.
Yeah, I would say, share your vision, share your purpose, and try and garner as much feedback as you can. And the sources that Micah was referring to are great sources for very candid, honest feedback. And integrate that feedback and maybe try and work towards a commitment to our policy.
Great. I'm going to turn this over to Eric. I had a great time with both of you. I want to do it again next week. Don't think we're scheduled for it, but we'll see.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Adam.
I think you're on mute, Eric.
I'm sorry about that. I should know. I've put up everyone's pictures and phone numbers and emails addresses so that you can reach out to each of the Micah and Marc and Adam if you have additional questions. And my phone numbers, emails also on the bottom there. We do have one last quick poll, which we're going to put up in terms of what are people thinking of in terms of how they were going to recommend this kind of a program to their friends or colleagues. Again, it was recorded, and so you'll be able to share the link with your colleagues. So the other thing, of course, want to thank everybody and point out that our other webinars from prior years and prior months are also available on the Second Nature website. And this year, instead of doing our in-person annual summit back in February, we're doing a series of 4 milestones over the course of the year. The first 3 days were in February, but we have another gathering in June, and then 2 more gatherings in the fall. And we hope that some of you will join us at those virtual events that are taking place this year. The next in-person event that Second Nature is going to be doing will be in February of 2022. And let me quickly end the poll here and share the results. So quite a few people thought it was valuable and they'd be recommending it to a friend. And I appreciate the feedback. All of you will get an email from us tomorrow. Again, thanking you for joining us with the links. And on behalf of Tim Carter, Second Nature's president, and the rest of the Second Nature team, I wish you all a very wonderful spring season.